Danger Dolan. It's Tuesday morning. The realms have just come back up after a 6-hour long maintenance. Setting your steaming coffee mug on the desk, you log into WoW. The loading screen ends. You jump back on your mount and continue circling Stormwind. You stop. Glance left. Chat box says welcome to the new patch. Oh my god, you cry. New patch. You roll your face along the keyboard looking for new features and content. Wait. Dungeon Finder looks the same, but oh my. Legacy flexible raids. What is that? All the good stuff. Old school Black Temple scaled for max level. Magus' Terrace on par with heroic scenarios. I ain't even reading the rest cause the tears of joy make everything hazy. So Tom Chilton recently noted in an interview with Vanian.eu that the tech is actually in place to scale old content like vanilla through kata raids and dungeons up to max level. Whether he meant using the challenge mode system of scaling an eye level down to suit the difficulty, or to scale a dungeon's difficulty up with each expansion, that remains unclear. The running Murloc guy over at the EU forums claims the only thing holding them back from introducing this scaled content system is that they haven't come up with an appropriate reward scheme yet. He suggests that folks brainstorm ideas in the forum thread to help stimulate the developers' brainstems into Eureka mode. And I love that people have been dishing out ideas. Ever since Cataclysm and the introduction of the revamped Dead Mines and SFK, I've had the dream that one day we'd see old raids come back as max level content. I remember back when Total Biscuit's Azeroth Daily was still around, and the only question I ever sent in was, will we ever see old raids brought back for max level? I've always felt it dreadful that these beloved raids and dungeons now only exist as soloable content. It's like stepping back into your primary school or kindergarten as an adult. It's a lonely feeling. You glide from place to place like some time-lost gust of wind, visiting your old hangout spots, reflecting on all the good times. Or, in this case, the bosses your old raid group used to spend hours on. It's nice to know that the raids are still there, and that people who missed out on the experience can still see it, but I myself will never go back to do them again because I'm terrified that I'll be just standing in a beloved raid, way overpowered, getting depressed because all the challenges and guildies that I used to know are now gone. So, I've decided that for this video, I'll do something different and try to help the devs if possible. Instead of the usual leave comments for the next topic, I'll be running through a series of possible scaled content implementation ideas and reward options. Then, I'd like to encourage you guys to cross-examine each and every one. That's right, I want you to poke holes in my ideas, find the flaws, tear them apart, then give your own perspective on how to approach scaled content and their rewards. Be critical, don't be afraid to suggest even the most obscure idea possible, since it might turn out to be that which makes it into the game. Usually I don't suggest this, but if you find yourself totally on board with an idea, don't be afraid to just spam this video at the Blizzard's developers to get their attention, or even just take your idea, tweet them, write an email, and send it to their inbox. Whatever you can do to get your voice heard. Now, before I run through my thoughts, I want to make a few things clear. This is where you guys can start getting critical, since it's already been confirmed that these solo versions of raids will remain as they are, with cosmetic stuff like mounts and transmog pieces still intact. I won't bring that up, and I hope you guys won't either. But first off, Blizzard do not revamp this theoretical scaled content in the style of Dead Mines, SFK, Zul'Gurub, Zul'Aman, Scarlet Monastery, and Scholomance. Make no mistake, these were brilliant dungeon redesigns, and I enjoyed them thoroughly. But let me make something clear, revamps are not the same as scaling, not by a long shot. I'm aware that older raids need retuning and mechanical updates since certain bosses haven't taken new classes and abilities into account, while others like Lady Varsh need serious overhauls. But just like with your character model updates, you must, I repeat must, leave the design and aesthetic values untouched. Just update the mechanics and tune them as scalable content. Do not, under any circumstances, defile people's memories of their favorite raid by introducing heroic dungeon type revamps. Because if we've learned anything from George Lucas, it's that fans like a higher quality experience, but only if the original footage hasn't been besmirched by ridiculous special effects. I acknowledge that old content revamps are popular, but they needlessly take too much development time away from other areas, and the forums always fill with rage at the sacrilege since the old version no longer exists. It's just not worth it. Secondly, scaled content must not interfere with current progression. If you bring back old raids, right, they must never reward anything higher than flexible mode level loot. You can feel free to scale the difficulty to anything you like, but I don't recommend anything beyond flex mode since the raiding community will fracture between scaled and current tiers. And the instant scaled content loot is the same eye level as in normal mode progression drops. It means you've gone too far. Likewise, the scaled content should never distract players from current content. Scaled raids and dungeons should act as a supplement to expansion and patch cycles, not as a focus. And I'm not talking about raids or progression here, I mean things like the Timeless Isle awarding catch-up loot, heroic dungeons gearing up new level 90s, craftable gear, current tier LFR and everything in between. I'm not saying make scaled content completely optional like challenge modes, but there needs to be either a limit to how much scaled content you can do, or the rewards must be less enticing than all current content. Third, if you're using the challenge mode tech to scale up raids, you need to bear in mind that either each expansion, those raids must account for new abilities, glyphs and talents, or you will have to take away players' abilities when they downscale themselves, which would be frustrating. If possible, try and upscale the raid's level between expansions and use the minimum eye level modifier from challenge modes to keep the difficulty balance where it needs to be. And now let's move on to the ideas. In order for us to talk about potential rewards, we first need to discuss how the scaled content will be showcased, starting with heroic dungeons. Early Cataclysm introduced hard LFG heroics which were received very poorly, whereas Mists went in the opposite direction with Zergable dungeons offering easily replaceable blue gear and valor points. Heroic scenarios bridged the gap by offering a random chance for the equivalent of flexible mode loot and a difficulty much closer to Cataclysm heroics. So let's break it down. You have easy LFG scenarios and LFR content for the more casual crowd which offers entry level gear. Then after that you have heroic scenarios, heroic kata style dungeons and flex mode raiding for those who might be looking for a challenge, but with content still puggable without needing voice chat or commitments. And finally you have challenge modes, normal and heroic raids for those looking to compete as a tight-knit team. You have the LFG crowd, the pug crowd, and the progression teams. So where do scaled legacy dungeons fit in? Well, here's my take on it. A challenge mode, race against the clock for legacy dungeons. 2 difficulty levels, LFG and Pug. Eye level, scaled down. They serve as an introduction to progression difficulty challenge mode since you've experienced most of these dungeons leveling up, so now is your chance to prove you've mastered them before you're ready for the new ones. Like a proving ground that makes you demonstrate you've mastered your class and role before you begin raiding, a legacy challenge mode will ask you to prove yourself before you're ready for the new content's challenge modes, which in this example would be the Pandaria 5-mans. Just an example using Pandaria as a template. You hit level 90, right? You gear up in LFG dungeons, scenarios and LFR, while amongst them you have the option to test your skill in a matchmaking leaderboard for legacy challenge modes with the difficulty equivalent of all LFG content. But wait, you're too skilled, too OP, you actually reforge your gear. So you start pugging around for heroic dungeons, heroic scenarios, and now you're in a casual flex mode raid team. It's time for hard mode challenge dungeons, the same as LFG challenge modes but tuned like Cataclysm dungeons. You need CC, dispels, pull orders, the whole 9 yards. Now you have gold in all the hard challenge modes, so what's next? Progression challenge modes in current content, Stormstout Brewery and the like. You've had both LFG dungeons and heroic scenarios to prepare, you're now ready for raid difficulty challenge modes. As for rewards, since this specific idea is, in my eyes, optional content, kind of like the challenge modes of today, it wouldn't make much sense to offer gear drops per boss. At most, getting the gold medal should award a big juicy valor point bonus, lesser charms, possibly upgrade stones which lets you upgrade a piece of gear once to save valor, the satchel of exotic mysteries containing a chance for pets and mounts. Move all the quirky drops from rare elites and Pandaria to challenge mode, so sometimes a boss will drop an item that summons a Hellstone Cauldron when warlocks aren't there, or Forager's Gloves which makes gathering resources faster. All those rare elite items which will become too easy to farm come next expansion. Put them in one of the only parts of the game that has longevity, challenge modes. Even theme the drops after each dungeon. Mr. Smite's Brass Compass, which transforms into Mr. Smite, have that drop in challenge mode Dead Mines. Between the Valor, leaderboard, bonus gear items, satchel, quirky items, and the return of beloved dungeons, these new challenge modes will provide plenty of incentive for all players with the added bonus of offering diverse content that doesn't take away from traditional progression. At the end of the day, legacy dungeons should remain optional, in my view. Now, legacy raids, that's a different story. Like with scaled dungeons, it'll reduce your eye level to a minimum threshold, but this time without a timer-based medal system. It'll be a weekly challenge, and like with my dungeon idea, there are 2 difficulty levels, LFR and Flex mode. It offers gear drops, oh yes, but before you raise your pitchforks and hand me over to the hungry hippos, just hear me out. Back in Wrath, we had a weekly quest from Archmage Landerlock which sent you into old raids to kill bosses for a reward, like Kirin Tor Rep and Emblems of Frost. LFR has more or less replaced this, but the idea of a weekly raid quest in old difficult content could easily be transferred into scaled raids. Amaz from Fox Force 5 suggests splitting old raids into wings like LFR or Flex mode, releasing a new random wing each week, so one week we're fighting the first 4 bosses in Ulduar, the next we're transported to the final 3 bosses in Blackwing Descent. If you release all the wings for every old raid at once, that'd be like removing the cap on daily quests, and we all know how that turned out. But if you limit everyone on a server to 1 new wing per week, it gives the devs enough time to tune future wings and time for players to clear the current one. You would effectively be treating a scaled raid as a new form of non-PvP centered Baradin Hold or Vault of Archivon, a weekly raiding alternative for players gearing up. Emphasis on gearing up, not those raiding normal or heroic mode, which should always remain the progression focus. If you think about it, when you clear LFR or Flex mode difficulty raids, they're split into 4 wings, right? For little Johnny to progress from raid to raid without any variety except old LFR wings showcasing current expansion raids, it means by the time he's finished LFR, Flex, Normal and Heroic, he's pretty much sick of the current raid tier, which as an example here would be Siege of Orgrimmar. But while he's gearing in LFR and Flex, he is offered a single legacy raid wing, just one, to gear up in. It's diverse content, it rewards gear, it's restricted to a few bosses so it won't burn you out or distract you from current raids. All it requires is scaled boss difficulty and mechanic tweaks with a week by week release schedule. It doesn't interfere with normal or heroic progression. It's essentially like adding an optional 5th wing to LFR and Flex mode raids, but brimming with delicious nostalgia. Of course, if Blizzard only wanted to scale it for either LFR or Flex, that's up to them. It really depends on the time involved tuning the various difficulties. As for these gear rewards, well that's easy, you just use the existing item models and give them the same eye level as LFR and Flex. This is not like challenge mode rewards, these legacy wings are designed to be a nice bite-sized choice in gear catch-up and thus giving transmoggable gear pieces which also happen to have the eye level you need for current content. That should be incentive enough. You retain the old raid for people who like to solo them and offer wings for the endgame group content crowd. Now with all that out of the way, let's turn to some viewer comments. Last video I did ask you guys to give you just some brief thoughts about the whole topic, and so let's start off with Super Duper Nice Guy. Revamping all the dungeons sounds way too ambitious. That would require way too much work from Blizz, and Blizz has told us multiple times that they want WoW to move forward, not backwards. There are already tons of cosmetic reasons why you should play old dungeons, like rare mounts, transmogrification, pets, achievements, and similar stuff. Now, I can certainly appreciate anyone who might feel hesitant about Blizzard sinking development time into scaling old content, and like I've mentioned before, revamps would be off the table as I agree that they'd be far too time consuming on their part. Here's the thing though, the way I envision this content and the ideas I've put forth, you might be surprised to hear that's not actually my preference. Ideally for me, each dungeon would be scaled to max level each expansion, given the difficulty of normal raids and turn into its own progression path in the vein of raid style dungeons. Each boss would drop high eye level gear. Each dungeon would be revamped in the style of Skullomance and Shadowfang Keep. The reason I haven't suggested these is because I don't feel they are appropriate to the game as it currently stands, but more prominently, they would require too much time to balance and develop. I don't even have to look at WoW's development tools and software to know that much. I'm also taking into account the subconscious assumptions made when anything new is introduced to the game, whereupon it is always judged harshly. That's why the Zandalari revamps were so ill received, because they features the focus of a patch, not as a supplemental inclusion alongside new content. So this isn't even written into my script, but I feel I have to say it. I'm trying to take into account what would be best for the game, even if I don't personally agree with it. I don't really like challenge modes that much, but I feel like if you use legacy dungeons in that style, that it would work well. It'd be like a progression for people who aren't majorly committed in teams and doing normal and heroic raids. They don't even have to be in a guild, but they can still compete with each other. That's what I'm going for. I'd like to see this old content brought back, but in a way that would actually suit the game, and with rewards that seem appropriate, to me at least. Anyway, going off on a tangent. Ideally, these scaling and tuning for LFR and Flex Mode raids would take place during the development of an expansion. I've had a gander at the Burning Crusade assortment of raids, and you can safely split each of them into a total of 16 or so wings, which, if you release them 1 week at a time, equates to 3 months worth of content. And that's in addition to all the new features of a patch. Now that's just Burning Crusade. You've also got Vanilla, Wrath, and Cataclysm raids, which all up give around 9 months worth of weekly winged raids. And all it requires is some simple tuning and mechanical adjustments. I don't feel this is ambitious at all, quite the opposite. You'd only need a skeleton crew to turn this concept into a reality. Blizzard would still be moving forward in this game, but at least this older content would provide some level cap diversity for group content. Of course, like Super Duper Nice Guy says, there's still incentive to solo this content for cosmetic rewards. Well, fine sir, I submit to you that you'll still be able to solo it and collect those gorgeous knickknacks. But this also provides challenge for those looking for variety at endgame. For people who enjoy lore and game story but don't like the idea of these older dungeons mysteriously making their way into current day, I offer this. Base these legacy dungeons and raids around a Caverns of Time theme with a Nosdormu button that makes him show up at the start of a dungeon to explain what the hell is going on, just like he does in the Well of Eternity dungeon. Make it clear you're grouping up for old content by having a month and year date indicator near the mini-map. Assuming for a moment the Warcraft year cycle started during the First War, the events of Warcraft 3 would take place in the year 20, Vanilla WoW would be set in the year 25, Outland content year 26, Wrath 27, and so on. Even patches in Pandaria span multiple months, but it's never clear exactly how many. Just having an indicator on the minimap would make everything obvious. Surprising it hasn't been implemented, but maybe they just haven't thought of it. Now we have a comment from Emenemone1. Scalable dungeons, eh? The issue isn't really the loot. It would be easy to implement a bonus roll type loot system that each boss kill simply gives you a choice between a level appropriate loot bag or gold valor, whatever. The bigger concern is how to handle scaling players down. I don't mind losing some stats, but what about my abilities? Do I regress to whatever I had at the level of the dungeon, or do I keep what I have learned and gain a huge advantage over lower leveled players? So if the dungeons and raids were not scaled up each expansion to reflect the new level cap, I'd be incredibly surprised. I share Eminy's concern about our abilities being taken away, and while I figure it'd be easy to leave them on the hotbar but make them unusable, like grayed out, you'd run into the same problem as the Oculus. If you take away a player's abilities and rotations, like the Oculus Drakes in their vehicle combat, it leaves that player confused and disoriented about how to play their character. I don't want that. None of you should want that. It's fun in moderation, like during quests or maybe for a single boss, but when an entire dungeon is centered around some different playstyle, then it gets a little bit intrusive. I've had another comment claim some abilities would break certain encounters because old bosses were reliant on things like elemental resistance and base damage being a certain value, whereas today it's just all over the place. But of course, it's all to do with balance and mechanic work. It goes without saying some raids like Vanilla's Molten Core and Blackwing Lair would need massive overhauls, while recent ones like Cataclysm's Bastion of Twilight needs only touch-ups and retuning. To summarize, scale content with expansions, normalize eye level, retain abilities, and rework encounters wherever required. Now let's quickly run through 2 last dungeon and raid reward possibilities, starting with Crux 3. I don't know how I feel about scaling old stuff, especially when they talk about rewards. Sort of implies that old things like Thunder Fury and random other weapons and armor would be removed from the game completely. However, rewards could be some kind of reclaimed tier piece that needs to be repaired via profession, which would also push leveling classes toward proper professions for them, i.e. blacksmiths would be able to reclaim warrior, pally, DK tier, leatherworking, druid, hunter, shaman, etc. Alright, so upgrading or repairing gear via professions is a neat idea on paper, and of course these days professions tend to be more money sinks than anything worthwhile unless you collect and sell patent BOEs or you just really need that profession bonus stat thing. Now if this old content dropped gear tokens instead of actual pieces, I'd take into account whether people would roll with that. The only reason I find getting tier tokens in raids acceptable is because I know that token will give me something typically more powerful than most pieces of the same eye level. Whereas if I got a token from legacy content for a normal run-of-the-mill gear piece and had to jump through some damn hoops once the dungeon is finished to turn that token into something worthwhile, only to then need to gem, reforge and enchant this thing for it to be useful, I probably won't bother doing anything unless the piece is a huge upgrade. When a boss drops a piece of loot, you should say, "Yes, I did it! I'm a gigantic winner!" Not, "Oh boy, guess I'll spend the next week gathering the mats to turn this into a gear piece 5 eye levels above my current one." However, I'm feeling what Crux means in the idea of legacy content dropping rewards that need additional effort to use, like every piece needs you to finish a quest before you can use it. It's more of a preference though, and it entirely depends on how you approach scaled content. Now we have our final comment from Lance Keeling. Have a shard system. Each boss drops a set amount of valor and a different amount of shards, with the last boss giving a token. With enough shards, you can redeem the tokens for appropriate gear that is LFR eye level. The tokens from scalable dungeons are very rare, where the raids have a high drop chance. This way, scalable dungeons will be run but not offer better rewards than the raids. This system also encourages players to stay till the end. We can make longer dungeons have better chances for tokens. So I think Lance might be onto something here. Maybe have scaled content act as a new type of rep faction by allowing you to create valor gear via tokens, but only if you can grind enough. Here's a thought: you take away justice points, the mostly obsolete currency we have today, and turn them into a shard system for LFG, LFR and legacy content. You run enough, collect justice shards, build your own pieces and complete your LFR gear set without even needing to step into LFR if you really don't want to. You can have legacy dungeons drop blue LFG dungeon loot because the justice shards offer the gateway to LFR loot. You can do a lot of things with tokens, but like I mentioned with Crux, you have to weigh out the difference between gear dropping from bosses and collecting pieces to form them. I know for a fact that I find it more exciting to just get a drop off a boss than it is to just spend some valor on a rep piece. So that's it for this discussion. If you are not on board with a lot of the ideas presented in this video, just give a thumbs down and leave some suggestions below. If you think we're onto something, inform Blizzard, post a comment in their suggestion thread linked below. Drop a comment here, detail your thoughts, give your solutions, your 2 cents, critique and criticize. Have I missed anything? Is there another way to approach this? What other reward schemes might there be? Let me know. So that's it. Have a good one.